Los Angeles had a pulse at night. A slow, deliberate rhythm, like the drag of a cigarette between painted lips, like the soft click of a revolver's hammer before the shot. This was a city forged on illusions, on the gilded promises of power and pleasure, on the fragile lie that money could buy anything. Once I loved it. The way its lights flickered like stars that refused to die, the way its streets whispered secrets to anyone willing to listen. But tonight, it felt foreign, distant, like a stranger staring back at me through a fogged mirror. I sat in my car, keys dangling in my hand, the engine still cold. The clock on the dashboard blinked 9:47 p.m. when my phone buzzed. A message. Short. Sharp. Sunset Club. Tonight. You need to see this. No name. No context. Just words that sank into me like a blade sliding between ribs. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, torn between curiosity and caution. The smart move would be to ignore it, to drive home, pour a whiskey, let the night swallow the message whole. But something stirred inside me, something restless, primal, clawing at my chest. I couldn't let it go, because deep down, beneath the layers of denial I'd built over years, I already knew. Even before I turned the key, before I set foot in that place, I knew something was waiting for me. Something that would unravel everything. The Sunset Club wasn't just a venue. It was a secret. Tucked away on the second floor of a crumbling Art Deco building. Its unmarked door was a silent challenge. You didn't belong unless you were invited. No neon signs. No online reviews. Just whispers among those who mattered. I'd heard of it in passing. A place where the rich played games the rest of us couldn't afford to understand. I stepped through the entrance, my pulse quickening, expecting a guard or a question. Nothing. No one stopped me. No one asked my name. The air inside was thick with the scent of cigar smoke and jasmine, the kind of luxury that didn't need to announce itself. I didn't belong here. That much was clear. And neither did she. I saw her the moment I crossed the threshold. Sarah. My Sarah. She sat in a corner booth, her black silk dress clinging to her like a second skin, catching the dim light in a way that made my breath hitch. She wasn't alone. Beside her, a man, silver-haired, 60, maybe 70, lounged with the ease of someone who'd never been denied. His suit was impeccable, tailored to perfection, a quiet declaration of wealth and control. Sarah leaned into him, her laughter soft and melodic, her fingers brushing the inside of his wrist. It wasn't clumsy or hesitant. It was deliberate, practiced, intimate in a way that cut deeper than any betrayal I'd ever imagined. My stomach twisted into a knot, but my feet stayed rooted in the shadows. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not yet. The Sunset Club wasn't a bar. It wasn't even a lounge. It was something darker, something alive with intent. As my eyes adjusted to the low light, I saw them, women in silk and diamonds, their smiles sharp as glass, draped over men old enough to be their fathers. Hands rested on thighs, fingers traced the edges of champagne flutes left untouched. Laughter rang out, rehearsed and hollow, a performance polished to perfection. It hit me then, cold and clear. This was an auction. A marketplace where beauty was currency and loyalty was a lie. And Sarah, my wife, was part of it. She didn't flinch under his gaze, didn't pull away when his hand settled on her knee. She leaned closer, whispering something that made him smile, a slow, predatory curl of his lips. My fists clenched until my knuckles ached, but it wasn't anger driving me. Anger was too small, too fleeting. This was something else, something heavy, absolute, like the moment before a storm breaks. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't sneaking around in shame. She'd stepped into this world fully, confidently, as if I didn't exist. As if our years together had been erased with the swipe of a manicured hand. I forced a breath, slow and ragged, steadying myself against the wall. My phone burned in my pocket, a silent weapon I hadn't yet drawn. I pulled it out, my hands trembling just enough to notice, and snapped the first picture. Then another. Then a third. Each click was a tether, anchoring me to the reality unfolding in front of me. Sarah had always been careful. She knew how to lie with a smile, how to weave stories that fit perfectly into the cracks of my doubt. But tonight, she'd let her guard slip. Tonight, she didn't know I was here. The man signaled a waiter with a flick of his wrist. A keycard slid across the table, black, sleek, unassuming. Sarah's fingers closed around it, her movements smooth and certain. I didn't need to see what came next. I knew. She wasn't just unfaithful. She was someone else entirely, a stranger wearing my wife's face. I pocketed my phone, the weight of it grounding me as I turned toward the exit. My chest tightened with every step, but my mind was clear. Now I had proof. Now I had power. And Sarah? She had no idea her carefully constructed life was about to collapse. Not in the way she feared, in a way she'd never see coming. The city blurred past in streaks of red and white as I drove, the silence in the car pressing against my skull. My knuckles whitened against the steering wheel, the leather creaking under my grip. When I'd left the Sunset Club, I'd been numb, a hollow shell moving on instinct. But now, that numbness was fraying, giving way to something colder, heavier, more dangerous. Sarah wasn't just cheating. She wasn't just breaking vows. She was a stranger I'd shared a bed with for years, a ghost who'd slipped through my fingers while I'd been too blind to notice. The realization didn't hit like a punch. It settled instead, deep and quiet, a truth that didn't need to shout to be felt. I knew what I had to do. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the numbness had returned, wrapping me like armor. The street was still, the kind of quiet that only came after midnight, when the city exhaled and the innocent slept. Sarah wasn't home. Of course she wasn't. She was still out there, in his world, playing her part. I stepped inside, leaving the lights off. The house felt wrong. Too dark, too empty. My jacket hung over the chair where I'd left it that morning. Her perfume lingered near the staircase, faint but mocking. The glass I'd used sat in the sink, untouched. Everything was the same. And yet, nothing was. Because now I knew. I moved to my office, the room where I'd built my life. Our life, piece by piece. Sitting at my desk, I pulled out my phone. The pictures glowed on the screen, sharp and unforgiving. Sarah laughing. Sarah leaning in. Sarah taking the keycard from a man who'd bought her like she was something to own. My hands should have shaken. They didn't. This wasn't a discovery anymore. It was confirmation. And confirmation demanded action. I opened my laptop, my fingers moving with cold precision. Sarah thought she was clever. She'd covered her tracks well, or so she believed. But I'd spent 30 years building an empire, a future she'd decided to torch. And fire? It doesn't care what you meant to burn. It consumes everything. I started with her phone records, logging into our shared account. She'd been careful, no direct calls, no obvious texts. But she wasn't flawless. A number appeared, repeated, insistent. Not his, not the silver-haired bastard from the club. Someone else. I ran it through a search. The result stopped me cold. A lawyer. My breath slowed to a crawl. The first call had been 6 months ago. The second, a month later. Then, a pattern, regular, calculated, deliberate. Sarah wasn't just having an affair. She was planning something bigger. She wasn't preparing to cheat. She was preparing to leave. Not just leave. To dismantle me. I closed my laptop, exhaling through my nose as the pieces clicked together. This wasn't a reckless fling born of lust. This was strategy, precise, ruthless, dangerous. And I'd been blind to it, sleeping beside her night after night while she wove her web. I checked my watch. 2:37 a.m. Still no sign of her. I could have called, could have waited in the dark like the fool she thought I was. But that wasn't me anymore. The man she'd married was gone, replaced by someone sharper, harder. I grabbed my jacket and walked out the door. The night air bit into my skin, crisp and unforgiving. If Sarah thought she was in control of this game, she was about to learn how wrong she was. I drove without direction, the streets emptying as Los Angeles slipped into its quiet hours. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every late night she'd brushed off, every vague excuse, every lie she'd fed me with a smile. 6 months. 6 months of planning, of building a life without me while I'd convinced myself the distance between us was temporary. That was the worst of it. Not her betrayal, but my own failure to see it. I pulled into the lot of a 24-hour cafe, its flickering sign a lifeline in the dark. Mark was already there, hunched over a cold coffee in a corner booth. He looked up as I approached, his face a mask of exhaustion and something else, pity, maybe. I slid into the seat across from him. Silence stretched between us until he broke it. "You look like hell." I didn't laugh. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. The pictures lit up the space between us. Mark scrolled through them, his jaw tightening with each image. "Shit," he muttered, setting the phone down. I knew she was up to something, but this, he shook his head. How long? 6 months. His eyes darkened. Jesus, Adam. So what now? I didn't answer right away. I didn't have a plan, not yet. But I knew one thing. Sarah thought she'd outsmarted me. She thought I'd break, that I'd react with rage or despair. She was wrong. I need you to find everything, I said, my voice low. Bank accounts, transactions, properties, all of it. Mark studied me, then nodded. This doesn't end clean, you know. I did, and I was ready for it. Morning crept into Los Angeles, pale and indifferent, the smog turning the sky a dull gray. I sat in my car, half a block from the house, staring at the front door. Sarah was home. Her car sat in the driveway, perfectly parked, a lie of normalcy. She'd come back after me, slipped out of that silk dress, washed away the scent of his cologne, and climbed into our bed like nothing had changed. How many nights had I slept beside her, oblivious, while she dreamed of escape? The thoughts sank into me, heavy and suffocating. I gripped the steering wheel until my hands ached, forcing my breath to steady. Mark had delivered. Bank statements, property records, transactions. She'd hidden it all under a different name, tied to a law firm that specialized in protecting assets. She'd been siphoning money from our joint account, small amounts at first, then larger, funneling it into her exit strategy. She wasn't just leaving. She was planning to gut me. Then I saw it. A pending transfer. $450,000. Set to process in 3 days. That was her endgame. In 72 hours, she'd be gone, taking everything I'd built. I exhaled, my breath fogging the windshield. She thought she had time. She thought I was still in the dark. She was wrong. I stepped out of the car and walked to the house. Inside, the silence was too perfect. She was in the kitchen, the clink of a coffee cup giving her away. I stood in the doorway, watching her. For a moment, she was just Sarah, the woman I'd loved, the woman I'd vowed to protect. Then she turned, and the illusion shattered. She smiled, smooth and effortless. Morning, she said, sipping her coffee. She didn't know I knew. How was your night? I asked, leaning against the counter. Fine, she replied, unruffled. Stayed in. Watched something on Netflix. A perfect lie, delivered with ease. I let her have it. For now. She turned to the sink, oblivious to how close she was to losing everything. Because I wasn't going to stop her from leaving. I was going to let her think she'd won, until the moment she reached for the money and found nothing. The next 2 days crawled by, each second a countdown to the inevitable. I played my part flawlessly, asked no questions, kept my routine, gave her no hint that her world was crumbling. Sarah moved through the house with quiet confidence, kissing my cheek before errands, tilting her phone away from me at night, asking about my day with feigned interest. She thought I was blind. She thought I was weak. The final day arrived. She moved with purpose, her steps lighter, her voice softer, like a weight was lifting. At 10:15 a.m., her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, then at me. Running out for errands, she said, too casual. Need anything? I asked, sipping my coffee. No, I'm good. She was gone. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. She drove to a bank downtown, her confidence unshaken. I stayed back, watching as she stepped inside, heels clicking against marble. I didn't need to follow her in. I knew what was waiting, or rather, what wasn't. The night before, I drained the account. Every cent, rerouted through untraceable transfers into my name. She had no legal claim. She'd walk in expecting victory and find ruin. 15 minutes later, she emerged, rigid, her phone pressed to her ear. She was calling him, Sinclair, her supposed savior. I almost laughed. She still thought she had a way out. But Sinclair had received my gift that morning. Photos, statements, proof she'd been stealing from him too. He wouldn't forgive her. She paced, her composure cracking. Then she ran to her car, slamming the door shut. She knew something was wrong. She was scared. And I wasn't done. I drove home slowly, savoring the moment. She was already there, the front door ajar. Her breathing, shallow, panicked, echoed through the house. She paced the living room, phone in hand, hair tangled from frantic fingers. She froze when she saw me. What's wrong? I asked, voice calm. Nothing, she lied, forcing a smile. Just a weird morning. Weird how? A mix-up at the bank, she stammered. They froze my account. I tilted my head. That's what happens when you steal from people, huh? Her body went still. Her breath caught. She knew I knew. You thought you were careful, I said, stepping closer. The money. The lawyer. Him. Adam. Don't lie to me again. She had nothing left. No excuses, no safety nets. I poured a drink, watching her unravel. You stole from me. Then you tried to steal from Sinclair. Her eyes widened. She was terrified, not of me, but of him. You forgot I know you, I said, voice low. Better than anyone. She reached for me, desperate. I stepped back. Don't. Where are you going? She called as I walked to the door. I don't need to do anything else, I said, turning to face her one last time. Because I didn't. Sarah belonged to her consequences now. I stepped outside, the air cool and clean. Behind me, she stood frozen, trapped by her own choices. The game was over. She'd lost. And I was free.